Hello, my name is Shane Bruce, and today I want to talk to you about weapons of mass destruction made from industrial technologies. Now, a weapon of mass destruction is a weapon, or a nuclear, chemical, or biological weapon that causes widespread death or destruction. This is the usual definition. Now, this destruction can also include buildings, mountains, natural structures, or the biosphere. Homeland Security simply names it as a device that will cause widespread problems to the health of people, which is kind of a better item. But the difference is whether it's a device, I'm going to show you a methodology that produces as much as a dirty nuclear bomb without radiation. Well, there is some thorium, but we'll get into this. Now, the idea is, hey, how do you create a weapon of mass destruction using industrial technologies? Well, first you have to use resources. You come to an area, you see some resources, you put them together and get your desired effect, let's call it. So, let's look at some geology. Now, we're talking about the easiest way to, man can only affect certain parts of the planet. We can set, this is the surface, this is like a little microcosm of humanity, towns, cities, cars, people, trees, whatever you have you, over here on the land. It's not the scale, but you get the idea. Now, man can only affect certain areas of the earth because we're not that great, or historically, we could only affect certain areas of the earth. We can affect the atmosphere. We can pollute the atmosphere. We can pollute the surface of the land. We're really good at spreading out over the surface of the land. And usually the surface of the water is what's traditionally been an area of human contamination. This is something slightly different. So, to understand the geology, you have to understand the ocean. Now, something that few people know, it's known in the areas of intelligence and in the industrial circles and marine ecology and marine mineral spectrum, and anybody that does mining is, first, here we have a continental shelf. It comes out maybe about 40 miles or so, maybe more, maybe less. Takes a deep plunge into the deep ocean. This is 1,800 to 1,200 feet, maybe 800 feet of water. Now, what is known to certain people, and now you, is this ocean floor is littered with accumulated heavy metals. This happens over tens of thousands of years. These heavy metals have accumulated into nodules and modules on the bottom of the ocean. They include manganese, and they include arsenic. And all the alkaline metals, base metals that would react to an acid, have steadily accumulated. They're in large crystals. There's down there 2 to 3 ton pure ore rocks of nodules of heavy metals. And they literally line the ocean floor for hundreds of miles. This is accumulated, they have a chemical reaction, they go down there and bond with itself, those that can, and create these huge nodules. So we basically have a thin level of heavy metals, it's like plated with heavy metals, along the ocean floor. That's what the rocks down there are. This is formed because of the wash off from the land. All these heavy metals that don't bind or are dissolved in acidic or even pH neutral water go to the ocean, precipitate to the bottom, and eventually they will bind in some way with each other and form these nodules. So there are trillions of tons, perhaps, of heavy metals on the ocean floor, especially in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, I'm going to step through this process. Please wait and reserve your fact checking to the end. I will include all the scientific journals. Not all. I'll hit some highlights of scientific journals. They have hundreds of references in those, and they're easy searches. Everything you're going to hear in here is hard science fact. Science fact is science peer-reviewed journals where other scientists who are experts in the field have reviewed these facts and findings and have agreed that this is what is. These are the researchers who go out and do the research, publish their findings, get paid to do it. We're talking university professors or oil petroleum products. So, now the interesting thing about heavy metals is they make a tremendously effective weapon of mass destruction. You look at the nuclear weapons. They're made of uranium, heavy metal. They're fissionable. These things cause chain reaction, cause explosions. But in and of itself, uranium is a hugely toxic heavy metal. It's a poison. So that fallout of uranium dust that happens is what's deadly. I mean, the initial blast would cause some damage, some flame, maybe by 50 miles, 150 miles of effect. But that radiation cloud from the uranium, of that refined uranium, which is always decaying, and even when it breaks apart, those half-lives cause decay. But we're not talking about a nuclear weapon here. We're talking about a chemical weapon. But it's important to know, of course, arsenic is the king of poisons. You've heard of arsenic, that's a poison. Manganese at high levels, even though it's an essential element for your body at right levels, on high levels, it is a neurotoxin that causes hypertension and atypical Parkinson's disease. And so arsenic is just a wonderland of diseases. It'll cause respiratory failure, organ failure, vitamin A deficiencies, night blindness, heart disease from vitamin A deficiency. It will cause inflammation. Great sores will break out if someone's heavily exposed all at once, or if they're partially exposed over a period of time. So, as we're looking at making a weapon of mass destruction, we want to look at heavy metals. If there are any chemical results, it's lasting. It'll take it out an area for indefinite periods of time. If you can introduce it into the food streams and the waters, if you can poison the city by putting it in the reservoirs, you've got it made. If you make it a gas, well, such as arsenic mustard gas, you're going to kill lots of people. And it kills them over a long period of time. That land becomes untenable, right? So, ideally, if we're going to create an industrial weapon of mass destruction using industrial technologies, we have millions or billions of tons of heavy metal concentrated ready to happen. If we can aerate these in some way, we have magic happening, right? Bad, dark, evil magic, but it's going to slay tens of thousands, maybe millions of people. So, how do we do this? Well, first thing to really pay attention to in creating large amounts of chemical reactions is these offshore oil refineries. Oil wells that go to refineries. Sometimes they don't have refineries on them. They're oil wells, rigs that go down here through the thinner part of this Earth's crust, where it's deep, into these oil reservoirs, right? Now, something that happens since 1924 is called fracking. Now, fracking is where they attempt to get more oil out of those oil wells than are available. There's available oil they tap into. Then there's the unavailable oil that's in the shale, rock, and these other type things. So they do all kinds of things. They put high pressure through the oil well. They'll try to increase pressure and crack the shell up. They'll even put down an explosive gun that will fire rounds to blow apart these areas, right? Just in all directions, just try to break the shell up. They'll put down acids to try to dissolve the stuff. They'll even drill horizontally into these other oil wells, oil reservoirs, by horizontal drilling to try to connect all these oil reservoirs so they get the maximum pumping. That's not so effective as one would think. As, well, they're just mechanically chipping at the wall, so to speak, and trying to etch it with masses. To really affect something, you need a biological agent. Now, what's interesting about these oil wells, in the 1980s, they started introducing what are called petroleum microbes. Most notably, is Oleospira antarctica. Now, Oleospira simply means an oil, bacteria that thrives in oil, an oil petroleum microbe, or petroleum microbe is what they're often called. They're used in fracking. Now this specific one, see how wonderful this is? It looks like a squid with maybe 100, 150 tentacles. It's just an amazing looking specimen of a microbe. It's actually kind of wonderful in Antarctica because it serves like a nature's purpose down there. It lived in frozen ice, literally at 32 degrees or 0 degrees depending on the scale, and would eat hydrocarbons and break apart these heavy metal ores. It creates CO2 and creates DHA. It creates basic proteins. Just on its own, it's a heavy manipulator of elemental and molecular chemistry. It can even edit others' DNA. This is one serious microbe that was not discovered until 1984. I'll show you some pictures at the end. This is a quick walkthrough. It's not a simple process. It's not trivial to make a weapon of mass destruction because any psycho could do it. This takes some resources. Anyways, this Oleospira antarctica was heavily genetically modified, as you'll see in the following documentation, to withstand heat and who knows what else. I mean, it is a heavily modified, genetically modified microbe, this petroleum microbe. Now what this does is when they introduced it into the oil well, which introduces into these oil reservoirs, and it gets propagated into every connecting oil reservoir, is it begins to, one, decrease the viscosity of the oil, making the oil slippier, right? It also creates CO2. The CO2 in these oil reservoirs increase the pressure. So we're talking about the first effect of how this petroleum microbes can be used. One is as a trigger. Now, biological fire, something that fire creates CO2. It doesn't create the proteins that the thing does, but basically, this is a biological fire. It's down there consuming the oil, creating a gas. And so, as with any molecular growth or biological growth or any living species with unlimited resources or plenty of resources, its population is going to grow like this. It's going to be an exponential growth. So, this is the amount of bacteria, but this is also the pressure in this oil well. This pressure in this oil well will suddenly increase. And they want it to. That's why they've introduced it, is to increase the pressure from this oil, make it more viscous, and pump the stuff up really quickly. But this makes a very effective trigger, like a mercury switch does on when something is moved, or a fuse. A fuse is a better example. A time fuse, at some point, it will reach the explosive capacity of the dynamite and blow up. Same thing happens on a closed oil rig. If this stuff isn't vented out, it will explode. And like in the BP Deepwater Horizon oil rig, it exploded. Because they had shut this stuff off, they had shut down the oil capacity, they had capped it ineffectively, and then after this biological specimen had been introduced, it exploded. Now, how do we know this? Because on the day of the explosion, these professors were down there in the boats, microbiologists scooping up water and oil and taking samples of bacteria content on the surface ocean. This stuff takes 2 to 3 weeks to culture. Actually, it takes maybe 6 weeks to culture a specimen well enough for injection. So this takes weeks or months to infect a oil reservoir. This happened way before anything else. It was not, I repeat, it was not added, as BP claimed, to be a biological agent to eat the oil. It was not a remedial action that would remediate oil. Now, it would remediate the human population. I mean, kill off humans like crazy, because we're going to see how to do this. So, we have oil now bursting up from these infected oil wells. Now, this Holy Spirit Antarctica serves a dual purpose. You want effective. You want to be able to do two things at once, and that's really important in being a highly effective weapon of mass destruction. I mean, you don't want to be sloppy on it. You want to go for the maximum kills as possible, right? At least that's the philosophy behind weapons of mass destruction. So, the other thing this thing does, Holy Spirit Antarctica, or 3 or 4 other major petroleum microbes. I'm just picking on this one because it's just so interesting to me to begin with. And in a beneficial way. But once manipulated, it can be used to trigger a oil well explosion, or even more. It acts as an acid, and it will break down these metallic ores, because it's going down there and gets carbon, it gets hydrogen, it gets something else, and makes these proteins, right? It's very active in making these proteins. And CO2. Now, where does it get this? Well, you have to understand each hydrocarbons. Now, a hydrocarbon looks something like this. So you have 6 carbons and 6 hydrogen. This is a molecule of a hydrocarbon. So in order to create CO2, this petroleum microbe will grab a carbon. They'll grab 2 or 3 of these carbons. So what happens then? Well, then you have the area flushed with hydrogen. All these hydrogens are going to break up. So you have a massive amount of hydrogen trying to attach to things down there. Now at the same time, these heavy metals, this molecule will grab, say, iron from these ores, or phosphate, because it's making proteins. It's making healthy proteins. But every time it picks up 1 or 2 things, it wants an iron, it wants phosphate. Oh, well, there's arsenic, there's manganese. It looks at it, might as well be intelligent. We're talking about smart bug. It takes this heavy metal and just throws it up, right? So this heavy metal is now floating up there. And say if it's an arsenic element, because it's just there floating alone, and it combines with, say, 3 of these hydrogens, you then have ASH3. Now this is called arsine. It is the most deadly form of arsenic. It is an arsenic gas, ready to be inhaled, and will pretty much meld with any type of acidic or even neutrally balanced. This ASH3 will bind within a arsenic. This ASH3 is a gas produced from the petroleum microbe, as well as manganese and everything else. So all these chemical reactions are happening, and all these gases are mixing with the CO2. And guess what? They're starting to bubble up. They're bubbling up from the ocean floor. Now, the hard part of this, of course, is what normally never happens, especially in the oil, is this oil, especially contaminated oil, would regularly never reach the ocean floor. For this contaminated oil, BP did something different, and they knew what they were doing. They've been doing it for 40 years. They know this oil, contaminated with petroleum microbes, spread across miles of the ocean surface, will do little to nothing because there's no heavy metals on the surface of the ocean. All the heavy metals are on the bottom. So what do? They take Corexit and they dump it. Now, Corexit is just a chemical compound that causes the ocean, the oil in the ocean, to precipitate. This oil comes down. Precipitate means like rain. It means to make solid, rain to the bottom. It takes a gas and turns into a liquid, or it takes a liquid and turns into a solid. And that solid is heavier than the liquids, most liquids, and will fall to the bottom. And this billion gallons of infected oil, billion gallons. They added 1 million gallons of Corexit to 1 billion gallons of infected oil. And this microbe is now crawling all over all these heavy metals. So we're talking a multi-billion reaction of billions of gallons reacting with millions of tons of heavy metal. Now this is just an unprecedented incident. This creates more heavy metals into the clouds. Now, I've been out in the middle of the ocean, 200 miles from everywhere. There's nothing out there but sun beating down, Portuguese man of war, and fish. And it's just the evaporation center of the Gulf of Mexico. This is where all the rains come from, and you'll see the death maps later on. The death toll must be staggering. It's hard to estimate without some accurate figures, but all the diseases that are caused by heavy metals goes up, because once these clouds form and go inland, and rain comes down like thunder, and storms, and hurricanes, it goes hundreds of miles inland. This is actually affecting the entire eastern half of the United States, everything this side of the Rockies, the Great Divide. Everything that gets rain from a hurricane shows increased deaths from certain ailments, stroke, hypertoxicity, diabetes is even caused by heavy metals. Anything that most diseases are caused from inflammatories. Almost, in fact, there's theories among the medical people that all diseases are caused by inflammatories. And heavy metals are the most effective inflammatory that we know. To make a death rain. Now, this was probably seen in Hiroshima and Nagasaki for about 7 or 8 days, the black rain. Now, this rain is invisible. Not only is it invisible, but it's tasteless and odorless. We're talking about a covert weapon of mass destruction that can cause widespread death and affect the biosphere. So that anybody that's out there, I was out myself in Pacificola National Forest, 100 miles inland from shore. I'm well off the map here, 100 miles inland. Right at the metal thing. So, and it rained for 3 days. Now, I'm in extreme camping. I probably don't seem it, but when I want to relax, I get out of the office away from all the technology and all the science, and I do some back-to-nature camping. That means I'm collecting rainwater, because in Apalachicola National Forest, there aren't any faucets, there isn't any fresh water. So when rain occurs in the Everglades, people don't turn from it. We're out there hanging out laundry. I was out there by myself with my dog for about 3 weeks. No ill effects, doing fine. I accidentally killed a deer, ate that. I took my water with me. But to get more water, I have to go back to town, drive 40, 50 miles, and just to get a tap of water to refill my water. So when it rains, I'm out there putting out plastic bowls. I'm collecting rainwater, several gallons. It rained storm 3 days straight. I'm bathing in it, I'm washing my clothes in it, I take everything I can and put it out there in the rain because it's fresh water, and I wouldn't touch another water source out there in the Everglades because they're pretty nasty. About a week before, a bunch of people showed up for some kind of gathering in the woods, and so I commingled. We didn't share food though. There was no interaction like that. I'm just in the same parking lot proximity because they kind of moved in next to me. And within 2 or 3 days after that 2 or 3 day rain, actually about the 3rd or 4th day, it rained for 3 days. On the 4th day, we started having these sores. I must have had 40 sores, ulcerous sores, all over. And I thought some kind of staph infection, some type of contagion. I'm looking around and I'm seeing 30 out 40 other people with it. I'm thinking this is the most virulent contamination of some kind of communicable disease I have ever seen. We have been hit by bacteria. Because it just never occurred to me to think that rain contained heavy metals. Now, I've worked in hazardous materials, and then our first job out of college was hazardous remedial action program, hazardous materials remedial action program, a DOE office. I have a physics degree, and I've worked in biology departments. So I was down there working in the biology department at the University of New Orleans. I was just taking a break. So it did not occur to me. I thought it was some kind of weird infection. And if I took methyl sulfate-based antibiotics, the symptoms and the pain would subside. But it took months of antibiotics every day, 2 or 3 months, to get these sores to close. But it wasn't an infection. I went out, there wasn't the entire population being affected by these heavy metals being spread from me. Okay? It's heavy metal from the rain. First-hand experience, so I've gained a little bit of interest in this area. Now, as a physicist, we're all blamed for weapons of mass destruction usually because we can logically ascertain and project what will happen. That's just our ability to formulate math and science and create these models from diagrams and math and etc. So this heavy metal rain is an effect. Now, with scientific discovery, everybody wants to take credit. Hey, I discovered this, I invented this, I put my name on it. I can't really do that. Someone else discovered this weapon of mass destruction, and by all accounts, it pre-planned it. Because it's already happened, and I didn't put together these pieces like you are until later. So, I don't get the credit, I'm just simply exposing it. A weapon of mass destruction, and it has to be planned. Nobody goes to this much effort, even though the EPA was saying stop. Everybody was saying stop. They didn't want the oil dropped above the ocean. They didn't see any reason for it. It made no sense to put this oil out of the reach from where it couldn't be reclaimed. Just something BP did on their own. And they hired people to do it. All the workers were sick. There's a court actions against BP, but none of the courts or BP or the government has addressed this heavy metal rain that has decimated America. It is a poison bowl. It's a poisonous nation now. It's in the biosphere. Consumer Reports does a report where they found arsenic in orange juice, and apple juice, and grape juice, and grapefruit juice, and all the things, tangerine juice, whatever have you, is now contaminated with arsenic. It's because it rains down, and it's in the oceans, and the streams, and the food sources. We know it's in the fish. We know it's in the mussels. They've invented that part. I mean, they've put enough, it creates enough poison to poison an entire ocean. An entire ocean of trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of gallons of water. It is just ridiculous that there could be that much poison. And it's just as ridiculous that no one would expect it wouldn't be in the rain. Especially when it forms these gaseous elements, which this petroleum microbe, which has been genetically modified to be in places that would never be in, is now churning out. Now, this fracking is also seen in other cases. It's widespread, like, Flint, Michigan. Lead contamination. They say it's due to the pipes in Flint, but no, that's not true. The lead contamination is also across the border in Canada. There's lead in the water supply. Now, that's because during fracking, so, yes, your people you know, if you're in America, and you yourself have probably been poisoned in some way. Now, the second part, I should do a whole second video about how to treat heavy metal poisoning, because not only that, there is a disinformation coming from Britain itself and such places as New Zealand, where there was another spill where they wanted to use this Corexit. And Australia, India, all these countries which are little satellite countries of Britain are all saying stuff like arsenic dissipates on its own. Arsenic will not dissipate on its own from your body. Arsenic is a bioantagonist. It will chemically, now we're anthropomorphizing arsenic, but arsenic will go through and displace calcium, trying to knock out its way and try to take its place. Arsenic will accumulate in one's body over a lifetime, any mammal, fish, or anything else. That's why they're concentrated in fish and everything else.
Now, I've talked about the science, but in science, we like to check our results. We like to see a result and know it's within our boundaries of what we expect. It's a guesstimation. All scientists do it. We're taught to do it from the year one. And we want to see if our answers are on target. How do we do this? So our target expectations are how many deaths are occurring from heavy metal rains. Now the CDC maps tell us that these deaths are occurring, what years they are occurring as compared to other places. This map is the lower respiratory infections, which are killing people. Now this shows a comparison from a change over time. As these infections are a symptom of arsenic poisoning, we expect them to occur in these wind patterns. Here we see a pattern that emerges. It changed from 1980 to 2014 after the oil spill, and these, even though it's lowered across the nation, these respiratory infections are in the south, right where we'd expect the rains to fall. So we're looking on target here. This is a map of neoplasms. Neoplasms are cysts, cancerous or otherwise. These are deaths from neoplasms, so they're pretty serious. You'll also see the rain pattern has occurred here, and also a spot out in Nevada. Now Nevada is where the nuclear weapons were used. The uranium spread in the ground and air out there, and no surprise, there's cancers and other cysts and neoplasms out there, but we show a wind pattern here which is causing the same thing. Again, our weapon of mass destruction is on target. This is a death map of stroke from 2014 to 2016. As we see, our weapon of mass destruction is having catastrophic effects, and the death toll is rising quickly with each disease that we see. As manganese causes hypertension and arsenic causes, vascular failure, organ failure, heart failure, and etc., we're looking at the change of heart failures here. We're looking at the deaths of heart failures from the 70s into the 2000s. As you will see, they move from the north, from the industrial area, to the south after fracking has started. So we are seeing a massive amount of disease and a migration of where not to live. In more recent years, these stats have turned to black in several counties, as you see in the wind patterns here. At a whopping 3%, that means 1 in 30 people are being killed from heart failure in these weapons of mass destruction wind zones. Of course, hospitalizations due to heart attack has gone up again in the eastern half of the United States. Massive devastation. You'll see that part of Nevada as well. And that little spot in Washington, I think, is Mount St. Helens eruption, where the heavy metals from the volcano erupted. So we're following a heavy metals pattern here of death and destruction, widespread death and destruction, the very definition of a weapon of mass destruction. And this is just the heart maps. Each of these overlaying maps is a different set of deaths and different statistics altogether. Nearly every disease I've looked at has this windfall pattern due to inflammation. Not even diabetes is caused by inflammation, believe it or not. The people who will tell you that there's a culture or something in the south, but no, it's a change of the environment as far as environmental pollution from our weapon of mass destruction. Now this is prevalent and will of course happen. There are people who tell you this is the stroke belt and something else, but those telling you it's a diet from fried foods will probably have to explain why the infants are in our weapon of mass destruction target area and expectations. Again, the eastern half of the United States. There are studies in Louisiana and Alabama showing it doesn't matter where the child lived or what they ate, they were both affected. This is because they played in the rain, ladies and gentlemen. A kill zone, our target is within our estimation, and our working science model is working. So, the CDC has a age mortality longevity map of where people die the quickest. Of course, infants are dying, and this is at least 200 and 100,000 greater at the dark purple there. That means probably 1%, 2%. It's hard to tell because they have or over, so it's maxing the limit of their charts of these death areas in our targeted areas. Again, the little Nevada area of nuclear testing. So we have a weapon of mass destruction matching atomic bombs. Not only matching the destructive power of an atomic bomb, but a much wider area. Hiroshima might have been 20 miles, maybe 50 miles. This is nearly 1,000 or 10,000 square miles, hundreds of thousands square miles. It's 1,000 miles in every direction. So we're talking some large statistics. This is cardiovascular diseases. There's just disease after disease. It follows the same pattern. Again, this little spot in Nevada and our hurricane weapons mass destruction from the BP explosion and the heavy metals there. It's like no one's ever looked at these maps before and thought, why? This is septicemia. Septicemia is a blood infection where their entire blood gets infected from from heavy metals, really. The vascular have many abrasions and many damages throughout the entire circulatory system, so septicemia sets in. Now you'll notice Nevada, of course, but you'll notice a little yin and yang where Tennessee is blank. This is because Tennessee will lie about their septicemia rates. There is a place called Oak Ridge National Labs on Y12, and you'll see my case of Bruce versus Great Britain in the petition of the United States Supreme Court, where I'm accusing UT managed hospitals. UT is a prime contractor of the ORNL and Y12, which is a national entity being run by a state entity. So we have stacks of immunity on national and state entities where they are refusing to test, treat, or acknowledge heavy metals. This is because back in 2008 or so, Y12 had a heavy metal spill. It poisoned a lot of people, and they shut down testing diagnosis so the people downstream wouldn't get tested. Yes, the government appears to be working in a terroristic conspiracy. I'd call it treason against the American people. But you'd have to read that be further in depth. I'm just talking about the BP weapon of mass destruction, not a small spill that would affect hundreds of thousands. This is affecting hundreds of millions. So we have an interesting thing here. But Tennessee's an abnormality, of course, and it shows a geostatistically anomaly where they're not reporting what they should. And that's pretty much a slide on any claim that national security they have, because the first thing you'd want in a national lab refinery that does heavy metal work and refines uranium would be, of course, to say, hey, who stole this uranium? Is anybody poisoned for uranium running around? Just in case they lost their head not tracking anything, showing up a heavy metal poisoning would be an indicator. But no, they don't do that. And they really failed on the any risk management whatsoever. DMSA is cost $200,000 a year to Chile. That's $1 million per person for 4 years for a chronically poisoned person with arsenic. But with the billions they have, I mean, they offered $8 million to their CEO. They make $11 billion per year. Together, they have a $20 billion budget. They could have manufactured the DMSA for a fraction of a cent on $1. And if they had back in 2008, America would be prepared for this weapon of mass destruction from the BP, from the British Petroleum. But of course they didn't. They had lawyers, hoodlums, crooks, tyrants, treasonous, just mass murdering assholes, really. But that's Tennessee. That's East Tennessee in particular. And so the East Tennessee district, one can't get treated in, and one has to drive 80 miles. Now, around the district, there are plenty of places you get radiation therapy, but not within the East Tennessee district of the United States district there. So It's not an easy task sometimes, in other places than some would guess. Of course, heavy metals reduce one's immunity system. One's immune system fails because of the infections in the lungs and intestines, so viruses can get in easier. This is COVID deaths of 8/9/2020. Of course, we see our weapon of mass destruction has laid down the ground for any virus infection, and we have, again, massive, widespread deaths for thousands of miles, and that's 1,000 miles across and 1,000 miles up at least. 1,200 miles up. It goes well into the Great Lakes. Whereas the last map was deaths, these are where people would more likely catch the COVID-19 virus. Now this is just because people get sick and report it. There's many people who might have it who's never had a single symptom, but these people are symptomatic and have gone in and got tested. So the symptoms come much quicker if one's already ill, as has been reported. And all these people are at risk in the eastern United States. Weapon of mass destruction. So now that we know our model is on target, our weapon of mass destruction is effectively affecting all rain, let's look at the incident itself and review our technology. And first the incident though. BP's oil spill from the Deepwater Horizon. You should know the BP Deepwater Horizon incident, explosion, it was never called an accident by anybody, was found for murder, 11 counts of murder. The managers, they tried to blame the day manager, night manager. They said it was a corporate culture that promoted risk. There were no less than 12 safety systems that had been sabotaged, not just in disuse or forgotten, sabotage, missing wires, switches, or batteries that caused the explosion. Plus a rapid pressure increase, which we've talked about, and so it would be infinitesimal possible that it could ever have been an accident in any way. It was sabotage. This is a weapon of mass destruction by design. We're looking about how to create one here by taking lots of steps and complex steps to do so. But the pressure in the Deepwater Horizon oil well is caused by microbes should be the most espoused fact ever to reach media. It is widely known. It says here in this biotechnology and petroleum industry, the method of microbial gas production for MEOR, which is a microbial enhanced oil recovery, was originally formulated by Zoel in 1946. Zoel's principal idea was to inject or encourage indigenous bacteria to produce CO2 and other methane to help repressurize the reservoir and decrease the oil viscosity in case of limestone and carbonaceous sandstone to leach calcite and saturite out from, thus liberating the absorbed oil. This, of course, is exactly what I'm saying. They go down there, they repressurize the well, CO2, and eat away at all the minerals, calcium elements, and everything else, and heavy metals. It eats away at everything. And it's been in practice an idea since 1946. It has been in practice in every oil well in fracking using microbial enhanced oil recovery for decades. It is such a common practice. It is the first and only thing that anyone should have said is, hey, they exploded it because it was pressurized. The pressure went up. Mystery solved in one page. Of course, there's hundreds of documents, and if you look at this document on my list of documents in the court filings, you will see hundreds of references to scientific papers. It is a most common practice in the oil industry and has and will be used for who knows how long. It is the way to repressurize an oil well. Of course, the BP Deepwater Horizon didn't need pressurized. That's how to add it to a oil that doesn't need pressure and increase the pressure so dramatically that it explodes. It's usually used at the last stage of an oil well, but when we're designing a weapon of mass destruction, we want to pressurize and be big and flood the ocean with as many millions of gallons as possible. This is NASA's photograph from space, of course, of 200, 400 miles of oil spill. This is almost reaching Cuba and Mexico down there. I've been out there. It's nothing. There's nobody out there. Nobody even uses these lanes. But that huge amounts of heavy metals underneath that, it's the huge amount of oil that took months to plug up. Now remember the dates of this, because the dates will come in important. So what's required to be established for a model here to say our premises are accurate and truthful? Well, one is that, is this infected oil? Is this oil infected with microbes, petroleum microbes that we'll eat, and which petroleum microbes they are? Now, and also, hey, who knew that these were petroleum microbes? Who was coming up? Who ever knew such a thing existed, and who had put them there? These are kind of important things to expose.
The plume is actually disappearing. The plume is being biodegraded, that there is a new form of microbiology that is attacking this plume and using it as a food source.
Just to bring it back to the...
Get moving now, guys. Sorry. Tight schedule here.
Okay.
Right, you get it
Thank
up?
you.
So that was one BP employee being interrupted by BP before he said too much. Actually, he's inaccurate. A plume is the bacteria itself, the spread of bacteria. He's referring to the oil as a plume. The plume in biology terms, like if you're a professor of biology, would be the bacteria is a plume. So they're just switching some words around there, but they know it's there, and they know that because they put it there. Now I'll show you how this happened. And I'll show that in 1 minute. But first, you have to understand that anything in the ocean, it rains fish and frogs on people. People believe that. It actually happens. And also, every rain carries bacteria. It's not like a steam thing where you're putting it in still and sterilizing, making distilled water. That's not how rain works. It evaporates. It brings bacteria, molecules. It brings everything with it. Shown in this study. There's an out study where any rain brought in from anywhere would bring in bacteria and also heavy metals. This is 3 miles high in the Alps, and it was bringing in dust and bacteria from the Sahara and other places from around the world. These rains carry bacteria. And we can look at more than a confused blurb by BP about why that bacteria is here. It's well documented. It's everywhere. As I've called this Oceanospirillus antarcticus, or Antarctica, it was found in Antarctica. It's right there on the map. It was found on a station out there one summer. And it was found by Yakimov. Bear in mind, they were looking for petroleum microbes, finding microbes in the water and trying to culture them. And they found the Oceanospirillus antarctica, which is a benevolent microbe until they got their hands on it. So here's what happened. This takes 2 or 3 months to culture, but it was instantly ready and appeared on the same day, fully saturated oil from that explosion. It's no secret that it takes 2 months to culture, and it's even in the Wikipedia, where it talks about how Yakimov and his team discovered it, a saprophyll organism, which means it loves the cold and it's supposed to get along with cold. But take a look at this thing once you start reading about it. It was located in the bay at the Ross Sea, at that little map I showed you from that station I showed you. But this thing, Oceanospirillus Antarctica, performs aerobic respiration but can also grow under anaerobic conditions. It can breathe air, but it doesn't need air to breathe. It lives fine without it. This is it doesn't eat food as we know it. It doesn't eat carbohydrates or glucose or amino acids or glutamine. And it can synthesize its own polysaturated spirulinoic acid, which is like fish oil. It can take these raw elements and minerals and hydrocarbons and create pretty much life from it. It can feed itself, feed whatever replicated. It can manipulate DNA. Basically, humans are just barely mocking this bacteria and methods of its chemistry and its ability to manipulate RNA, DNA. It can actually change spliced DNA. It is an incredible little microbe. It's when I started reading about this, I was fascinated. But what to draw from here is it takes 2 months in darkness and rich sea cultures and given everything it needs to saturate a sample, and it takes 4 months to have any amount of it at all. So the oil well had been pretty much cultured or infected. I don't want to call it infected, but we'll look at a little bit here and see that it was genetically modified as well. Now you've seen what I've seen, but I want to tell you a little bit more than you need to know for a weapon of mass destruction. You'll see the plume of the fully cultured Antarctospiralis, the chemipro bacteria, throughout May, and then it returns to a variety of bacteria. But look in June. In June, something else happens. In June, another plume comes up, and this oil that has covered hundreds of miles and is now miles deep and down inside the bottom of the ocean, where it's churning away at the bottom of the ocean, has produced unseen before bacteria. And I promise you it's been unseen before, because, and this is not what the BP was talking about, because BP didn't know about this yet. And we're going to look at some further studies. I'm actually going to pull up the scientific journals because, forgive my little obsession here about the weapon of mass destruction, but this bacteria is root to it, and the more one knows, knowledge is power. But we have two other bacteria other than Deepwater Horizon. Well, we have other ocean spiralis, they're calling this. Now, this is because Antarctospiralis segmented DNA has shown up, and it has created these other bacteria living in the oil and coming up and filling up the ocean. It has actually terraformed the Gulf Coast and the ocean within it. Now, looking at this, we see that the genetic sequences of this bacteria have drastically altered other DNA. This article is talking about where the Ospirillus antarctica has created new species. I realize I might have to translate some of this, but it says that Ospirillus antarctica should not have been in that kind of temperatures. It wasn't made for it. But there's 165 RNA gene libraries where the clones of this bacteria, which we can assume has been genetically modified, appeared in no less than 27 of the other bacteria that they had never existed before. And it goes ahead and says in these other things that multiple bacteria, Antarctospiralis, acted as a donor and gave part of its DNA, the gene splices, into these bioaugmentation, and has created other species from this mobile genetic element. So mobile genetic element is what is spliced into a DNA. A mobile genetic element means that someone spliced DNA. And these multiple genes for chaperones, outer membrane, efflux proteins, and also heavy metal and drug-resistant proteins were found to be associated with predicted GIs. That means to this bug, which is already a gram-negative, that means it has a double cell wall, which means it's already resistant, but it's basically armor-plated. And made it more resistant, and made it resistant to temperatures, and made it resistant to heavy metals and drug resistance, and affected the outer membrane. And I'm not even sure what a chaperone is, but I think that means it makes it more able to proliferate itself. And so that we're looking at a genome sequence where they went through its DNA and all these other DNAs of these bacteria that showed up. Now this came out in 2013. This is that second plume I would be talking about that came up that no one's really noticed. They said they collected some stuff from the deep water, but really it just bubbled up. And so we have new species here, no less than 20, because 27 of them came up, and they only recognized one, that of Ospirillus antarctica. And so 10 of those had same things, but the other ones had also acquired compositional similarity. That means they had been made and manufactured. Now remember, this superbug in the world of bacteria would be called God by other bacteria, as it makes proteins and splices DNA out of pure inorganic matter and makes life itself, which man is a long way from. It has done some amazing things, and it created this bacteria. Now this bacteria is basically God's reset button. If the world went to hell and this bacteria survived, it would recreate a different looking Earth from whatever it had, because that's what it does. It sat down there in the bottom of the world in frozen wastelands and changed frozen inorganic waste and hydrocarbons into life. And it's been poked, prodded, and genetically spiced to be anywhere. And so, with such idiots making such drastic changes to bacteria, we're lucky the entire world doesn't change into some kind of bubbling goo whilst the DNA is being rewritten constantly from every source as this thing takes apart and puts apart what it wants to, when it wants to, and how it does. Now, luckily, it's mostly benevolent bacteria. I mean, as a bacteria, I think I've been infected with it. This is only because I had Lyme disease, got Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and had a Lyme disease test, and my band IgG 41 came up as positive. Now, IgG band 41 means a flagella positive bacteria. Now, we've seen the flagella, that means those legs on the bacteria. The 150 or 50 or so that it has really long legs. So, I mean, I don't know whether it's not or not. I haven't had a blood culture put into crude oil to see if it would grow this stuff or not. But it's possible we're all infected with it. It's called ubiquitous in this report here. Ubiquitous bacteria from the Genosospirillus drive degradations of fursins. Ubiquitous means it's everywhere, people. This bacteria has covered the earth now because it has been freed from its icy den called the snake of Ragnarok or whatever else, the great worm. But the reset button has been brought up, cultured, put in oil wells, and used to trigger an oil well, put the ocean on fire, and then dumped into the accumulated heavy metals, which it has not touched in like millions of years or whatever else. It wasn't part of the design for it to be down there. So not only is DNA going to be changed everywhere from new bacteria showing up, new viruses, COVID-19, everything else. I mean, this sounds apocalyptic, but we're talking about a weapon of mass destruction. We don't want to be shy. I mean, these British fellows have killed maybe tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of people. So they have taken number one in the, egotism of who's killed the most people. Now, I think this was because of the 200th anniversary of the Battle of New Orleans, where like 2,500 British soldiers were killed to like 20 or 50 Americans. I mean, it was a massacre, really. General Jackson just killed the British, and the anniversary was coming up. They might have heard something about it. Some small band wanted to blow up this oil well and cause some devastation just to get back or stop the parade. I mean, madmen are like that. I mean, who else would make a weapon of mass destruction? But the thing is, this bacteria that they use, now, that can be accomplished by one or two people. But to take the oil on the Corexit and drop it down where this bacteria hits the bottom of the ocean is just a whole nother level, where they took 1 billion, sure, oil might be a party stopper. That might stop people from talking. They might be mad. But to go through the extra links and change that oil, even the cultured infected oil, into weapon of mass destruction by dropping it to the bottom. I mean, these things might be seeping oil, heavy metal clouds, venting through the bottom of the ocean all the time, continually, over a slow period of time. But this was just, let's do it all at once. Let's make sure that people feel some pain, suffering, and poison, even if they're careful. But it is one really incredibly potent organism. And remember, it does with oil, with air or oxygen or without oxygen, it doesn't matter. This thing, all it really needs, as we saw in the secrophil, is a little bit of salt. Salt and a hydrocarbon, and it's making business. The salt keeps it alive with the, as long as there's a hydrocarbon, it can use those hydrogen molecules. Now, what I think it's doing is it's been introduced into an environment with heavy metals, and it doesn't like it. And it is purposely, if we can call it intelligent, I would, moving that heavy metal out of its environment by grabbing those hydrogens and connecting them to the arsenic and manganese and everything else, and making that arsenic gas so it bubbles out of the sea, because it doesn't care about the surface of the air. It's remaking the earth from the bottom of the ocean. And it wasn't the bottom of the world. It was doing what it was supposed to do. Now, among this bacteria that it created, it doesn't just create bacteria like itself. Since it's creating proteins and making abundant material for other bacteria to feed on, it's making bacteria that would feed on flesh from that acid that we talked about. Heck, it's making the same proteins that a pregnant mother would make to promote growth. They have tar balls. These tar balls are showing up even in 2014, as we see here. Anytime after a storm, these tar balls, which have never ever appeared before in the history of the Earth, well, except for maybe since man was fish, but after every storm, these tar balls appear on the shores. Now, the thing with these tar balls is they're heavily infected with bacteria. They're cultured. They're 100 times greater than the surrounding water. And one of these bacteria is a Vibrio vulnificus. Now, the Vibrio vulnificus can be occasionally found in oysters as well. One bite of these oysters, or 2 bites of these oysters, and it takes major surgery. They actually have to go in and cut it out, and it's fatal 40% of the time. Now, this is also killing people, anybody who had a wound or a cut walking in the water down there in the bayous, or anything else, and this bacteria comes up in a plume, those people are 50-50 dead pretty much. The 40% is only because they can get immediate help in surgery. So we are talking hundreds of new bacteria and viruses that are going to be appearing everywhere, because viruses follow bacteria. A virus will model itself after a bacteria and does do what it does. Bacteria is like a virus's big brother. Big brother. It's just what it does. So we've got a big reset happening, and it's coming up in tar balls. So this is a gift that keeps on giving. Gift means, by the way, poison in German. And so we've established beyond any doubt that this bacteria is there. Everybody's talking about it in the scientific circles and oil circles and anybody in the know. Now, what about the heavy metals? Well, look at the cases of bioremediation, the case of arsenic removal. Now, man, since primitive times, has used bacteria to mine elements. Like there'd be a yellow slime. That yellow slime would feed on iron and intake into itself iron. It would eat iron, and so primitive man would go scoop up this at the beginning of the Iron Age, put this stuff in charcoal and burn it down, and the slime would produce pure ore nuggets. So we've been using bacteria to mine elements for a long time, so don't be surprised by that. I realize in modern times people have kind of forgotten some of them, our steps we took to get here. But bacteria and elements go hand in hand. It's different type of bacteria, especially those bacteria that have been made immune to heavy metals, like we have seen from the genetic alteration of the Nospirius antarcticus, eat arsenic, or let's say even the bacteria it makes will eat arsenic and manganese and everything else. So they're basically little balloons filled with heavy metals that are living and moving around in the rain. Now, here's where it gets kind of just absurd, because other places like France and Italy hear like bioremediation and believe it, but it's not true, because you don't want to use something in bioremediation that causes pollution to begin with. But here in this paper it states, that the combination of these arsenic reduction processes might explain the higher mobility of arsenic observed in the most contaminated sites. This means it blew up in their faces, arsenic went everywhere, and even though they're trying to take some of it out by picking up some kind of slime, it's polluting the entire system that they're trying to remediate. So it's not remediation. And in mathematics we call that a proof of contradiction, when P and not P, because pollution or not pollution. It can't be not pollution and pollution at the same time, and it becomes a matter of formal logic, which is, by the way, 2,000 or 3,000 years old. And people should learn formal logic to understand these arguments and scientific methods, but I'm assuring you, this is not a guess or anything else. These are mathematical steps where the world's been being poisoned, and it's not a remediation type thing. Even though in that clip that we saw, where we saw BP saying, the plume is being attacked, which is also incorrect. The plume wasn't being, the oil was being eaten. Then they span it off in many ways as possible as a remediation effort. The president says it's a remediation effort. I'm not going to fill this thing with news clips. I'm talking about how to design a weapon of mass destruction. Sarcasm or not, it's not remediation to use this. It stirs it no matter what, it stirs it, and it will have to stir it. And there's no other way to do it. And this is pretty much a failed paper kind of going, why are we missing? What's going on? We need to study more. And that pretty much translates as, my thesis is in trouble, but I have to keep on going. Some people should be raising alerts and not just being a cog in the university level of grants saying, show this works, and they're being paid to show it works by the billions and billions dollar industries. So it's ridiculous to think that it is remediation. The people who are trying to use it as remediation saying it's not working, we don't know why. They probably do know why, but what can they say? They're being paid to show that it is remediation. Would you lose your job to come up here and announce that? I'm announcing it for you. Share and share alike. Share as far as possible. This is well known. It's a dastardly deed. And, you know, only the British shouldn't have this weapon of mass destruction. It should be available to everybody. I mean, did they bring enough to share? Or, you know, we're going to stop all genetic manipulation everywhere. It's what it would take. But the people stopper has been set. The button has been set. And bacteria are making bacteria never seen before that will cover the earth and change genetics and spread heavy metals at will. And they are armored, drug resistant. But it is, if not apocalyptic, it's going to be very entertaining. So, how to make your own weapon of mass destruction, it's already been done. But they're hoping to make more. So we've established that wind can carry bacteria. Bacteria is present. Bacteria eat heavy metals. All the things are in place for our model and being proven by these, you know, unassailable sources. Scientific journals, even though I challenged the last one challenged itself. I'm just clarifying and translating what the scientist is saying there for you. It's important to be able to read as much as you can. Science, legal. Lawyers can't read this stuff. The intelligence community is kind of iffy. The government investigators for Obama completely failed. They said any system that fails complexly is complex, and that's why it failed. They just missed the point. It was sabotage. It's obvious to anybody who takes the time to look at it and just does the math. I mean, it really does the math. 12 systems failing, if one system failed per year, it would be 1 over a 15-digit number. I don't even know how to say that number, but like a million, you know. So, there's, is there heavy metals in the bottom of the sea? Well, here we see the CIA tweet of August 12, 2016 saying, manganese modules are encased in lucite recovered by Glomar. Now, Glomar was a ship built by Howard Hughes, and with the purported purpose of gathering these fist-sized magnesium nodules that sit on the bottom of the ocean. The ocean is littered with them. I mean, I'm stacked with them. The ocean is solid covered of heavy metal nodules. You know. In fact, we don't have to accept this little CIA blob as authority. We can look at a scientific journal, but anyways, it was so well known that the ocean is covered with heavy metals that this ship was built with that being the cover story. It was actually being built by Howard Hughes, hired by the CIA to go out and grab a nuclear ballistic sub from the Soviets that sunk in 1968 in the Pacific. Now, this ship was challenged by like 3 or 4 Russian vessels, but it sat there waving the American flag and saying, we're mining magnesium nodules and we're here collecting ore in crystalline pure structures from the bottom of the ocean. And it was believed, not only believed by the Russians, but it was mass media. I mean, it was the cover story, the very loud cover story back in the 60s and 70s. Of course, this was before I was born. Well, it was some before I was born. 1974, I was 4 years old. But, so this is widely accepted. The entire ocean is covered in heavy metals so that ships can be built and it can be used as a cover story to pick up ballistic nuclear subs, even though they're being guarded by the Russians. So, I don't want to sound like paranoia, but once you start dealing with a government who likes to cover up secrets and won't tell things and doesn't tell things, you start to have to worry about the cover stories. What are the cover stories these people are telling us about heavy metals? That arsenic doesn't accumulate in the body? We know full well it does. So anytime somebody tells a lie, now this is a nice cover story. There's no lie inherent in it. But if you use that mathematical proof of contradiction, if you find one lie, you can trace that lie back to the founding lie. You can go back and say, is this premise true or false? And so I know that arsenic accumulates. So when I was told that it doesn't accumulate by several doctors, I knew they were lying and wanted to find out why. Now, if you look at my Bruce versus Britain, Great Britain Supreme Court petition, you'll see that what I thought was a national conspiracy was actually just one being perpetrated by the East Tennessee, apparently, because the AAPC did come through and say, hey, this man does need treated. It's an emergency, urgent medical procedure that you need to follow, and the doctors at UT just buried that document. And so I dug it back out again and saying, exposing it to the world. But in a little bit, we'll look at the United Kingdom is spreading disinformation about arsenic poisoning. They also wanted to use Corexit in New Zealand, for instance, shortly after this in 2011. And they went down there and told all the New Zealanders, all the primitives who lands they want, saying, hey, arsenic won't really bother you. You doesn't accumulate and you can eat it. It'll grow out and it'll dissipate from your body. Well, I'll show it a little bit later. But some ridiculous things going on here. They wanted to sub, and it's not a secret that the bottom of the ocean is covered in heavy metals. It's widely known. That's the cover story. But, so, accept it as truth, and we don't have to accept the CIA document as the only truth. We have other sources. And please realize it's not just one source. I mean, there are hundreds of papers and thousands of people, tens of thousands of people discussing this, and there's books and books and books. At any bookstore on the oceanography and of the ocean floor especially, that will go on about this. I mean, this is just proving our models trivial at this point. It's so redundantly proved that it's an absolute. Here it says precipitation of manganese, phosphate, and other metals around seed particles under deep sea conditions over timescales of millions of years have produced extensive deposits of fist-sized polymetal nodules reaching densities of hundreds per meter square in crust. Then 20 meters superficial deposits. All these deposits occur across lots of the world's deep water areas, blah, 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 the water qualities. And it goes on. Some of them are pure, some of them are not, some have crustings. But notice it says fist-sized polymetal nodules. Things that are the size of your fist, if there's hundreds of them in 1 square meter, we are talking, they are filling that square meter. I mean, that square meter is nothing but these polymetal nodules. I mean, they have covered the ocean. The ocean is this fragmented plate of heavy metals and nothing else. So you can imagine billions of gallons of this oil, I mean, carrying all these bacteria whose sole purpose in life is to tear apart inorganic matter and create other things other than heavy metal, and they're going to take this heavy metal and they're going to even create other bacteria that are going to eat these heavy metals, even if it's a different species. And these tar balls have soaked into this hundreds of modules of heavy metals. So now you're wondering, what are these heavy metals comprised of? Well, they are spectacularly close to the heavy metal overdoses and heavy metal exposure that I've had. This arsenic pops up. This manganese is incredibly high at 6.1. That's 6 times off the chart. Now, you have to understand these charts. These aren't just human exposure compared to other humans for some reason. It's misleading to believe that. These are doses of, if you ate my hair, is my hair dangerous to you or not? So my hair at the initial onset of, I've never tried to do anything about this back in 2014, I think it was, when I first had somebody say, hey, it's heavy metal poisoning. I'm like, really? I'll check it out, and I had this done. My hair is 6 times what would be considered a toxic substance of manganese. That means my body is extremely toxic, and the arsenic's over there pushing these things. Now, I want you to look at the lead and cadmium and chromium and thorium. And I mean, thorium's kind of radical because thorium's something you find in like a radioactive reactor. Aluminum's up there, titanium, gallium, and vanadium. So pretty much I got in 3 days of drinking water, 3 or 4 days, maybe 3 or 4, 5 gallons of water, which I drank. I drank enough water to poison my body several times over at hazardous levels of heavy metal intoxication or heavy metal overdose. This means this water was many times the beyond any limit. I mean, this water I was drinking was a poison substance. I mean, if someone was trying to poison somebody and was wanting a dose, this stuff was up there. Because as I don't know if I told you before or not, I was out in the woods. I was camping for 3 or 4 weeks out in Apalachicola National Forest, and some other people came along for a gathering, and they're sociable people. I was just letting my dog run out there. I had a new puppy I was wanting to train, and I was spending some puppy time. Hey, bachelors get to do this kind of thing. So, anyways, some extreme camping, and I was fine until that rain, and it was 80 miles from any source. Everybody out there collected rainwater. They saw me doing it, actually. They saw me doing extreme camping. Hey, he's got rainwater. We're going to get rainwater too. There's no other interaction. And we all had sores. I thought it was some kind of weird bacterial infection. In fact, that was the word. Everybody was being told it was some kind of bacterial infection because of all these strange bacteria that was showing up from the oil spill and these tar balls, and people were falling dying, and there was flesh-eating bacteria and vibrio functinitis and everything else, and people were dying from bacteria and getting sores and everything else, and arms having to be hacked off. And so our sores, I thought, were from infection. I was wrong. It was heavy metal poisoning. And if this doctor in 2014 hadn't told me, I probably wouldn't be around today. I've taken a lot of effort to treat myself and get treated for this heavy metal poisoning. It's not an easy task. This is some deadly stuff we're talking about here. Manganese, for instance, is a neurotoxin. People just will stop to function, won't be able to talk right or anything else. They'll look like Parkinson's syndrome. You might have shakes. But moreover that, it's hypertension. It will cause such hypertension that your heart will expand. You'll have strokes, heart attacks. Mine has extra muscle. My heart's like 3 times the size of any other heart because of all the muscle that's been put onto it. If I'd known about this, I could have matched it before. And if the doctor's not told this, and doctors aren't what they used to be, people. Doctors won't sit and study. They have a little app on a computer, and that computer tells them, I'm being serious here. I'm not, I've went through 12 doctors and physical physician's assistants and whatever else, and I've asked them to say, hey, are you really diagnosing this? Or are you just kind of looking this up on an app on your phone or something? They go, yeah, absolutely. it's true. It tells us what to do, and there's so much to keep track of that it's easy way to do it. But where they fail at, and fail catastrophically and dismally, and fell into severe liability and cause death of their patients, is they don't look beyond that. They don't do any research. I have had them to my face. I have recordings of this because I was recording it to try to get the word pronunciation right. From cardiologists, that they just refuse to do any research, refuse to look into heavy metals, refuse to crack a book, refuse to look at those medical articles that are published just for doctors to read. Since they're being spoon-fed, they are being administratively controlled, and that means within seconds, the entire spectrum of doctors will change their ways of diagnosing and treating just on a computer program, which is ridiculous. They're failing in America like never before. The World Health Organization knows what to do. America just simply not. No scientist wants to use himself as an example, but I'm going to tell you what happened to me. And this is the way I'm going to tell you about medicine, about any legal liabilities. First, I tried these EDA, take an EDTA. You're told to take EDTA. EDTA is available over the counter and everything else. You might know my arsenic goes up. my arsenic goes into the red. It wasn't quite in the red before. And somewhere, I think my manganese on this one's 21. That's actually down, people. It was up to 40 at some point in time. I am getting EDTA IV treatments even. I'm getting actual chelations. You'll notice that some of these are going down like copper. Copper is being taken out because of the EDTA. Zinc's being taken out as well. Copper actually shows okay here. Phosphorus and calcium are being pushed out by arsenic. It tries to replace these type things. So it's important to remineralize. I mean, I'm going to make a second series about how to treat this stuff. I'm just trying to tell you, hey, these things are happening, and this is how weapon of mass destruction is occurring. Now, you'll see that the arsenic went up, and a few of them else went up also. This is because EDTA doesn't exactly purge. What EDTA does is dissolves these heavy metals and lets them cycle around your system a little bit more. Alright? Now, you will urinate some out with EDTA. This does take it out. Of course, the zinc's going down, and it's being taken out by EDTA. And copper goes down as well. I have to take copper supplements between chelations. So you have to understand that EDTA by itself will not do this. The other thing is I have metal teeth at this time. And the metal teeth are blocking the effectiveness of the EDTA. So while I'm getting readings from my tissue sample, you will not get accurate readings of a heavy metal overdose until you have these metal fillings taken out. You have to have these metal fillings taken out because EDTA will actually go up and leach the metal out of your fillings before it reaches these heavy metals. Now, it's gone up a little bit. Ours levels has, but maybe I was re-exposed to that kind of thing. But after the heavy metal fillings are taken out, we're going to see something completely different. Now here's where it gets scary and interesting. I've had my metal fillings removed, and I've had porcelain fillings put in. Make sure the porcelain fillings don't contain any metals whatsoever, and you can't have a metal joint or anything else in your body because the chelations won't work without it. But you'll notice my arsenic has substantially increased to 1 part per billion. My hair is now considered a hazardous material. Anyone eating it is in danger. So that's enjoyable. My manganese has gone down from 21 to 14 though, so the EDTA has been working. It has been pulling it out. It started at something like 40 or 60, 45 maybe. 45 times the level of, hey, this stuff is dangerous to a human. Now, the arsenic stops at about 1 part per billion. It doesn't go any higher than that. Now, this is because I'm speaking from personal experience. In my case, where I have chelated and removed my fillings and had EDTA bags, my hair would fall out. And so at 1 part per billion, since my hair is falling out, there is no higher reading that you can get from the hair, because at 1 part per billion the follicles shut down and kick out your hair. Now, it's not a permanent hair loss. My hair grows back. I know that sounds weird. I was bald for like 2 or 3 months. I started taking DMSA though, and my hair started growing back. But at fillings out, and so that's kind of handy. So you don't want to take the EDTA without the DMSA. In my case, taking the let's put it this way, instead of saying I'm giving you medical advice. In my case, it was a mistake to take the EDTA treatments unless I had the DMSA, because the DMSA is what pulls the arsenic out. Kind of like mining the ore with bacteria, where there's this sludge that they would gather up, or this slime, and pull the slime out. Well, the DMSA creates the slime that is excreted, and it doesn't excrete unless you have DMSA. So the EDTA will just simply stir the stuff up. Now, thankfully, the EDTA bags pulled the arsenic from around my heart, where I was having heart problems, because it condenses air in the pericardium. The arsenic likes to hang out in the pericardium and intestines and the lungs. I've also occasionally made a bubbler to inhale EDTA. Now, you have to be careful of EDTA because it dissolves calcium. You don't want to munch on the stuff. Even though they put it as a food additive and widely available, you want to make sure to put it in capsules. It's important to put in capsules because it will dissolve your teeth. And you want to be careful of dentists. You don't want people scraping your teeth when you're enamel has been softened by the EDTA, but you definitely want DMSA. So there's a 1 part per billion in arsenic. That means my body weight has been greater than 1 part per billion arsenic. Because this is just being stirred up, and this is over several years being chelated. Because even with the EDTA, I'd pee out a little bit. The urine would be a little bit. But DMSA, the articles say, is 42 times more effective than EDTA in removing arsenic. DMSA is specifically for lead, which mine is way down. I don't even worry about lead anymore. It was in the green, I think. Now it's way down in the green. But it's the only 2 things that will extract. EDTA works for other things. You have to be careful, all right? Once you get these readings, like you have to measure one thing to the other. The EDTA takes down the manganese, which you need down, but it stirs up the arsenic, so I have to take DMSA. I should take DMSA first anyways, but I don't like the hypertension. It really messes with a person. And I can barely walk sometimes. Canes, braces, back braces, knee braces, foot braces. It goes on and on. But after that, so to get what I'm trying to say here is to get an accurate sample, and it's possible to get an accurate sample of your heavy metal contamination, even chronic contamination, by removing all the metal from your body in the form of fillings or whatever else, and get an EDTA bag pushed through you because it's going to stir it up. But the caveat is, if you have arsenic poisoning, you don't just want the EDTA bag to get an accurate sample. You want to take some DMSA. You're not a lab animal. So take the DMSA if you have the arsenic, and then get and have that going already before you get the EDTA bag. You might even have it for a while. Now, DMSA is a little bit different from EDTA, and it causes there's some side effects. And in my case, now I've never had it be a case before, but no, I've never been sick in my life. I've never been to doctors before. It was kind of a shock, the entire culture. But in my case, there's something called granuloma annulare. These little sore, itchy spots appear. These are like 3 inches wide. They're on my side, on my skin, and when I take DMSA, these appear. This is because I have such substantial arsenic poisoning that when I take the DMSA, there's a reaction in the skin where it's trying to grab the DMSA that causes these reactions. Now, I didn't know this at all. So, I mean, when my finger starts looking like I dipped it into some type of arsenic mustard gas and starts swelling up and blistering and turning red and being itchy, and that little divot there, that's from the dermatologist taking the sample. Comes back, they call it annuloma granulare. It's not supposed to hurt. These actually do hurt a little bit. It's not exactly annuloma granulare. They don't know what causes it, but that's just how they name the symptom. It's a reaction under the skin, subcutaneous, that's happening. As long as I had heavy metal and took, or specifically arsenic, and took DMSA, these little sores, my finger would swell up. That's how I had DMSA, actually. I had purchased something I was told was DMSA from overseas to buy it in bulk to try to not pay the $1 million in 4 years or $250,000 per year. But they sent me titanium dioxide. I knew it was fake because when I took it, no blisters appeared, which is a kind of a weird thing. Hey, I didn't have blisters. I'm mad at the people. It's bad stuff. And it was bad stuff. Titanium is also odorless, tasteless, colorless. I got a video where I'm doing the chemical analysis and if not the identifying markers of DMSA, and it was not. It would turn out to be titanium. How do I know it turned out to be titanium? Because titanium later showed up in my hair samples. That's just a ridiculous type thing that happened, but it did happen. DMSA is so expensive that people will counterfeit it and send it from China, which I think should be felony offense. Trading poisons for medicines. It's a bad world, people. That's why we have weapons of mass destruction. People are ticked off. Or maybe we're ticked off because people have weapons of mass destruction. Who knows? But rather than philosophizing, I'm just telling you that in my case, while I'm not giving you medical advice, that I have had these sores for several months while I took DMSA. And finally, they're down. They have dissipated. I have taken enough DMSA on the tune of maybe $200,000 worth through Chimet, the generic stuff. Why is that gouged so much through the healthcare? Who knows? It doesn't cost nearly that much to make, but About $500 a day. I take 5 grams every, not 5 grams, sorry, 500 milligrams every 4 hours for a 2,500 milligram dose, 2.5 grams per day. And that's so I can have a constant stream, because anytime arsenic's in the body, it's accumulated, and when it's spreading around or just in your body, the stuff will react to it and pull it out. But arsenic will attack the cell, and after it attacks the cell, that cell dies and floats on to the next cell. So you want to have some fat on you. This is probably the only time where fat will save your life, but putting in some weight will dilute the dosage. One thing. Until you get the DMSA down to where you're not getting blisters. I've slimmed down about 20 pounds since then, because my body is no longer in this panic urgent reaction of, hey, maintain weight, dilute dosage. I have some instincts to survive. I have some common sense. They say genius is an abundance of common sense. And I have some serious instincts to survive. I went from 200 pounds to 280 pounds. I wasn't always fat like this. I didn't always have a fat finger, fat hand. I was a rangy wilderness traveling kind of guy, martial arts instructor, sailboat racer, forager. I would hiker. I would stream camp. I'd do things most people wouldn't do. This side of a professional athlete or team athlete. And so I have been down for about a decade. I am now pear-shaped. I'm not too happy about that. But remember, DMSA is a necessity. If these things appear, you just got to keep on taking them. That's what the Science Journal says. For these things, you just got to keep on taking the DMSA till the annulum and granularia disappear, because they will happen, and that means you've been severely poisoned at probably more than 1 part per million, which means your body is a toxic hazardous waste. Not a waste, but a hazardous material. And so you got to take these. Now, the interesting thing is, which I've been trying to add here and forgot about it, was anytime I usually take DMSA 22 days a month, and I'll alternate with minerals supplementation. But when I go for an EDTA type treatment, these things will reappear as they're stirred up from whatever intestines or lungs or wherever they have accumulated. Arsenic accumulates in the body. This is a fact. Get ready for the sticker shock. For 40 days of DMSA, it is $44,000. Or actually, I think it's 60 days. It's $500 a day with a copay of $1,500 if you have great medical care. Now, this is called the donut hole. It would be a little bit much more, but at $1,500 or at $5,000, but since I've such great coverage, it covers like $3,500 of it. So this would be a $5,000 bill for anybody else, just for your first prescription of the year to try to get DMSA through your insurance. Now, it'd be cheaper to buy it overseas. You don't know what you're getting, and everything else. So this is kind of bad. The American system, who knows? There's conspiracies within conspiracies. I mean, it's a bad world. Why else do you want to look at a video telling you how to make a weapon of mass destruction? You're already ticked off. You already know all this stuff. So that's about $250,000 per year out of pocket if you wanted to buy the stuff. Now you can go to your local pharmacy and have it with a prescription, have it compounded for I think about $2,000 a month out of pocket. Insurance doesn't cover it out of pocket. So after, there's a series of scary surprises when you get arsenic poison. And each one is just as bad as the last. So imagine how you feel when you're facing being poked by a nurse who's practicing her IVs and realizing these bags will be month after month after month for years. Not only that, but the sticker shock you just saw, the payments you just made, the pain you're going through, systemic pains of 9 or 10 constantly, joint pain, muscle failure, fatigue, hyperanxiety comes along with hypertension. So you're going to have every spectrum. It is just a hellacious type thing on earth. I mean, if you wanted to torture somebody you really, really hated over a long period of time, have them survive heavy metal poisoning and arsenic and manganese, because it is just such a horrible experience. If you get caught on the wrong side of your own weapon of mass destruction, your kitchen table is going to look like this. These EDTA bags I put in the capsule, by the way. I have my own capsule machine at this point. That chimette next to that is activated charcoal slurry. I make it slushy. I have about 3 a day of activated charcoal. The little pills that you get won't work. You need CoQ10 because it'll affect your heart. You're going to have C vitamins because the EDTA and the Chimet require C vitamins. Then you're going to have B vitamins, D vitamins. I don't even have D vitamins here. This first half is what it takes to chelate every 4 hours. That back half is what I take every 5 days. And during those 5 days, I'll take those 2 or 3 times. So I have just tons and tons of pills. Now, you can cut some of these down maybe if you don't have manganese poisoning. That little packet back there you don't see is a Nutrilite type thing. I bought so many of those I became a sponsor, but since I have manganese poisoning, they have manganese in them, I can't take it. That charcoal slushy you're seeing there, that's basically a green smoothie. But since I have manganese poisoning and avocado is a source of manganese, they don't contain avocados, which is kind of annoying because avocados is really what gives you the texture of a nice green smoothie. I use, actually I use artichoke hearts. Now this is not for the texture. Artichoke hearts create bile, and to expel bile from the body, there's a whole different level of medicine that we can get into. I'll do that in another video. It's going to take an hour to go into because it's really complex. Sorry. So look for video number 2 and share this one as far as possible. So after a while, you get settled into the idea of spending 3 or 4 hours a day, or 3 or 4 hours in a day getting insulation treatment from somewhere. You might do this twice a month. I like to do it about twice a month, maybe earlier. It gives me time to make sure the DMSA is working because I don't want to overdo the EDTA, which I did at first. And if you're interested in those vitamins and don't have manganese poisoning, which you'll still want the EDA treatments, but you'll be able to use a multivitamin, which I cannot. You can even contact me if I can set you up with an account or to buy such vitamins. That would be great. But get ready for years of this, and you get used to it. As I said before, I was kind of a wilderness strider, scout kind of guy. I would go out and walk for miles and travel around the nation just for fun. I'd do a perimeter check of the entire nation. I have in one trip. I am just that type of adventurous kind of guy. Even though I'm a physicist, data scientist, I'm at home in the lab, I've been a biologist and everything else. I love the great outdoors and I love our planet. And it loves me. And so I wasn't always a guy with the desk and the being overweight and sick. I have never been sick before in my life. That's probably why I survived the arsenic poisoning. But I am working with the right treatment to get back out there again and be the lean, trim machine that was without all these heavy metals that have polluted me. Now, about these heavy metals and misinformation and other information. All the information I've given you has been good thus far, but here is some disinformation. This is misinformation. Whereas I would show my sources and sites, and you can go see those sites, you can go look them up online. I'll put a link at the end to the papers, and you can look at all the papers and government sites and university publications and everything else, and actual publications. This is from New Zealand's health department. New Zealand is where the other place they wanted to use Corexit were stopped after a little bit of a spill. Over on the right it says arsenic does not usually accumulate and build up in the body. It leaves the body in space. That is absolutely untrue. That is just a malicious lie. We know arsenic does accumulate, and it does accumulate over a lifetime. They have no supporting documentation. And this is a government health site of New Zealand. Now, New Zealand is part of the UK conglomerate. It's kind of like a shadow country of UK. Kind of like Canada or Australia. It has a British Parliament. They bow to the British Queen, and they're being killed. And just as British has attacked America, they're planning to attack New Zealand. Because New Zealanders, probably the primitives whose land they want to take, drink water. So they say that arsenic we swallow is not absorbed, but it leaves the body. It does not leave the body in feces unless one has the MSA, and only if one has the MSA. It stores there. I've had it for 10 years. I know this. And there's lots of documentation. I'll show you the next one. Most of the body is absorbed passed out through the urine. This is not true. It does not, even on the left side it says blood testing is not usually recommended. It's useful as the body removes the arsenic from the blood within hours. Now it doesn't remove the arsenic from the blood, well, it's no longer in the blood, but that's because it's absorbed into the tissues, into the intestines and lungs and everything else. So they're being misleading there, and it says in the urine test and blood, that which I didn't include. You can look at all these sites and all these publications. It says urine will only show up for a few days. This is true. Urine and blood only shows up for a few days, then it disappears from urine and blood. But that's not because it's removed from the body. That's because it's accumulated in the body. And they will not provide hair testing in New Zealand. It's not recommended because they live in such arsenic anyways. They said it would be positive anyways. So they're telling people they're going to have positive things for arsenic. Now, this is a current publication, and so I think New Zealand's being targeted next, and if I had to guess, India. For a weapon of mass destruction, it should be an interesting time. They say you can swallow small amounts every day for a long time. And on the same page, they say if you've been exposed every day for the arsenic, then you have arsenic poisoning, will be in trouble. It's just completely fictitious misinformation done by UK, New Zealand, and Australia. They are being fed misinformation, and it's being dumbed down for people to sit there and nod dumbly at. You have to be smarter in this stage of weapon mass destruction. That's why our masterminds are sitting here listening to this video, isn't it? Because we want to know who's informed and who's not informed. But let's cause some social pandemic, shall we? And just share this video as far and widely as possible. Put it in your mailing list and mail everyone you've ever met since college. Get on some InfoSeek or PeopleSeek and look up all the people you've never known. Get on your alumni associations. Get into groups and post this, because here is the misinformation, and I have provided a lot of information, and everything else out there you will see for public consumption is going to be misinformation. Now, of course, we can go back and look at the scientific journals. We can look at the, that's really a riddle book, people. I mean, if you're not reading a scientific journal, you're reading somebody else's opinion of something. I'm just here to translate it and put together the model of how to create a weapon of mass destruction as we have. So congratulations, you know it works. It's guaranteed. It's a principle of science where we can predict how it will work, where it will work, and how effective it will work. We know the wind will carry it. We know the heavy metals and concentration of the heavy metal floor will hit it. And we know arsenic in any amount is going to accumulate in the body, and in great amounts it will cause death, destruction, and widespread death and destruction. Be wary, people, of misinformation. Misinformation, it comes from the government sometimes. Other governments particularly when a foreign government is occupying another nation, such as UK occupying New Zealand. You wouldn't see this in the UK or Britain rag, because Britons know better. Britons have a love affair with arsenic. They know it well and have used it for centuries. So again, please share, and share right away, and share with as many people as you possibly can. And there is a link there to copy for your documentation of all the information I've given you.